Path Radio, your number one online Islamic talk station.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome to another evening of Straight Talk here at Middle Path Radio. I'm Kamal Hussein and thank you for joining us. Tonight, the show is on women and equality. I want to start by sharing a story. My son, who's 10 years old, he was telling me that he was studying women's rights and the suffragette movement at school. I was quite amused and was thinking, why would children at that age be taught about women's rights in such details? Believe it or not, he knows the names of some of the main campaigners and how they struggled to secure their rights. So I want to look at women and equality. Why was there a need for this movement? And has feminism truly liberated women and given them equality? Also, how has women and equality shaped the world in the West and in the Muslim world? So stay tuned and please contribute. You can call us or text 074 77080 or tweet us at Middle Path Radio. So this evening we are honored to have with us a distinguished guest, Dr Nasreen Nawaz. She's a doctor by profession, a political activist, and has been on BBC News, Press TV and Islam Channel discussing issues related to women and Islam. Also a renowned international speaker and has written books and articles related to Muslim women. Inshallah, she will be joining us on the phone. And here in the studio, we have our regular contributors, Brother Abdul Samad and Brother Khairul Islam. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Wa alaikum salam.
Okay, let's go to the phone with Dr. Nasreen Nawaz, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum, sister.
Wa alaikum salam, brother.
Okay, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you fine. Jazakallah khair.
Okay, thank you for joining us.
Jazakallah khair, brother, for asking me to come on the show.
Okay, so let me start. There's so much discussion these days about gender equality all over the world. Is there really inequality between men and women? And why is that women are still fighting and campaigning for their rights?
Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Assalamu alaikum to all your guests and also your listeners as well, brother. It's an interesting question, brother. Actually, this year, the theme for International Women's Day, which was a day set up by the United Nations, was called Pledge for Parity or Pledge for Gender Equality. And one of the reasons for this theme for this year is that many people have noted an actual regression in gender equality in many states. Okay. So they basically set this as a premise for the year. And one of the reasons for this is that in 2014, the World Economic Forum predicted that it would take till 2095 to achieve gender equality.
Okay.
But just 1 year later, it actually revised its estimate to say that to achieve gender equality in the world would take till 2133. So every year it seems that they are constantly revising this estimate of gender equality. And you look at the world today, I mean, over the last few decades, you have had repeated conventions on women's rights, on gender equality. You've had the convention, the CEDAW Convention, which is basically a convention about preventing discrimination against women, violence against women.
Okay.
You've had numerous gender equality acts in various states. You've had in Britain the Sex Discrimination Act, Pregnancy Discrimination Act. You've had equality commissions and so on in so many states across Europe and in America. And yet what you find today is that you still have, what they would term inequality between men and women. The gender pay gap, as an example.
Okay.
UK, it's almost 20%. In Sweden, which is one of the countries which is praised for its level of gender equality, the pay gap remains at 15%.
Wow.
And in terms of women in high positions, people have seen a decline in women in high positions within Western states.
Is that particularly in UK or just Europe?
No, actually it's across the board. I mean, take the UK as an example. In Westminster, in Parliament, for example, the proportion of women to men is 4-1. So over the last 15 years, the increase of women in Parliament has basically been around 4% over the last 15 years. In the media, only 5% of editors of national media are women. So really, you find that the inequality exists within society. And you ask the interesting question, why is this the case? Why, after over a century of struggle for women's rights and gender equality, why after numerous international conventions and national laws within constitutions does this exist? And I think it's some simple points. I think, first of all, the concept of gender equality, which is not just about, and this is important for your listeners, it's not just about valuing women at the same level as men, or seeing the intellect of women as the same level as men. No, gender equality is about equalizing the rights and the roles and the choices of men and women. And this is a flawed and irrational concept. How can you equalize two beings which physically are unequal, and no one unequal? No one would actually dispute this. And this is why, for example, in the workplace, women are starting from it's not a level playing field within the economy. How can the career choices of women are naturally affected by motherhood and young children, and therefore you will never have true equality in the workplace. It's irrational. But also, I would say that gender equality's view of how to solve women's problems is misleading, and it's wrong, because they see everything from a gender perspective, that you can solve women's problems simply by equalizing their rights. And this is not the case. I mean, you take respect, for example. The basic concept of how you secure women's rights within society is respect. How do you establish respect for women within society? And it's not by equalizing their rights. Respect is based upon the view of society towards women. So if you have values within, for example, a capitalist society or liberal society that allows women to be exploited and objectified for profit, then how do you expect to produce respect for them within society? So really, it's a flawed concept, and it's an irrational concept. And this is why, you will never have this concept of securing full rights for women, or even gender equality in terms of the way that the West sees it as well.
So, I mean, after the suffragette movement, you would have expected that the women have got their rights and they can move on. But that's not the case, is it?
Sorry, I didn't capture that.
I said, after the suffragette movement, you would have expected that women have moved on and they have secured their rights. But that's not the case.
Yeah, you would have
expected. Clearly see that.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I think this is the case. Obviously, within Western states, you have certain political rights, you have certain economic and educational rights. You can't dispute that. But one interesting point, brother, is that it's not the system, it's not the secular system within these countries that naturally guaranteed these rights. The women had to fight for these rights. They had to throw themselves in front of horses. They had to chain themselves to railings. They had to, use particular actions in order, sometimes violent actions they used in order to secure these basic rights. So it wasn't the system that actually guaranteed these rights. They actually had to fight the system in order to do this. And the reason why it hasn't succeeded is because the whole perspective of change, the feminist change, where they look at everything from the perspective of gender or gender equality, is wrong. It's flawed. They don't see the fact that the system within countries is is to blame for the fact that women do not have their basic rights fulfilled.
Okay, so the discussion typically steers towards how backward Muslim societies are when it comes to women's rights. As a Muslim woman yourself, do you not agree that Muslim women are in need of liberation too?
Actually, there's an assumption within that question that many people actually, or kind of claim that many people actually, feminists make, which is that the West is somehow forward in women's rights. So, the Muslim world is backward and the Western world is forward in women's rights.
But isn't that the case? We see that, don't we?
Well, other than the fact that particular rights, like I mentioned, in education and politics and economics is secure, I wouldn't say that, for example, in Europe, 1 in 3 women face domestic violence in Europe. 3 women die at the hands of their partner or ex-partner every day in the US. In the UK, 1 in 5 women are victims of sexual violence before the age after the age of 16. And harassment in Germany, as an example, 50% of women face sexual harassment at the workplace. I wouldn't say that these are symbols of progress in women's rights. Okay. I wouldn't say a society that allows the exploitation of women, for profit, allows the sexualization of women and the devaluing of women is a progressive society in women's rights. I wouldn't come in this way. So really, this idea of Western states being hailed as a model of women's rights, I think this is wrong. Progressive in women's rights.
Don't you think it's a start? Because if you look at India, if you look at Pakistan, if you look at some of the African countries, women's rights, there is no such thing as women's rights, really, is there?
Well, in all these countries that you mentioned, even India, which is really one of the capitals of rape, India, South Africa,
exactly,
the capitals of rape within the world. they have so-called women's rights enshrined within their institutions, and yet why is it that you don't have a good treatment and honor and dignity given to women? As an example, South Africa is one of those countries where you have a high level of women within parliament, and yet, it's like I said, it's stated as one of the rare capitals of the world. Well, why is this?
Mm-hmm.
So really, it comes back to the point I was saying, that it's a very shallow idea to feel that just because you enshrine women's rights in constitutions, just because you gender equality and you propagate it within society, that you are inevitably going to get respect for women and their basic rights fulfilled.
But someone could argue that's a start, isn't it? If you look at the West, they recognize women's rights. Well, if you look at Saudi Arabia and other countries, women cannot even drive. They can't drive. They can't go out by themselves.
I would say that it's a very low standard to start with, brother, in terms of the rights of women. I think women deserve more than crumbs. I think they deserve more than a few token gestures in constitutions. I think there's Islam, which inshallah, hopefully we'll discuss, has a whole strategy for how you actually secure a credible strategy, which is time-tested, of how you actually respect and dignity for women and on their rights, their right to citizenship as well. And this idea you mentioned about Muslim states being backward, the thing is, it's not, undoubtedly you have problems facing women in the Muslim world. You have violence, you have forced marriages, you have female genital mutilation, you have many different issues, poverty affecting women and girls. But this is not because of Islam. This is actually due to the absence of Islam, its values and its laws. It's due to the influx or the presence of non-Islamic traditional cultures and practices and non-Islamic regimes and systems. Bangladesh, as an example, the amount of violence and sexual harassment of girls and women is known to be notorious in the country.
Yeah.
You have suicides of girls as a result of sexual harassment in the country.
Yeah.
And yet, this is not an Islamic regime. This is a secular regime, a very staunch secular regime that persecutes Muslims and, for practicing Islam.
Okay.
Take Pakistan as an example. You have, again, very low literacy rates of girls in particular places in Pakistan, like the tribal areas. Again, Pakistan, is it an Islamic system? Then secular system.
Okay.
Internationally as well. Saudi Arabia, you mentioned Saudi Arabia not able to vote, no political rights. Saudi Arabia is a monarchy. It's an absolute monarchy. It's not a Islamic system in play there. So really, it's a system that needs to be addressed within these countries.
Okay, fantastic. So many feminists in the Muslim world would challenge the patriarchal setup of our societies. How would you? Why must we accept the world where Muslim men must be a step above Muslim women, e.g., in family hierarchy, in ruling, and in other religious matters? What is wrong with the feminist basis of thinking?
What's wrong with the feminist basis of thinking is that they judge difference, by default as being hierarchy or discrimination. No difference in terms of rights and roles defined as naturally being discrimination. They see responsibility, a man taking responsibility over women, as Islam has defined, as a position of hierarchy. And this is completely wrong. And the reason for why they do this is they judge the Islamic law from their own history, from Western history. So within Western secular history, the difference in rights and roles between men and women reflected their view towards women as being inferior to men. So they viewed women as being spiritually inferior and intellectually inferior. Even some of the so-called fathers of secular thinking, such as Voltaire and Rousseau, they believed that the intellect of women was not to the level which would allow them to have a public role within society.
Wow.
And this therefore defined, the fact that women should be homemaker mothers and men should be the ones involved in politics and society. So the feminist history of feminism and women within Western secular states did define the rights and roles of women based upon a very inferior view of women.
Okay.
But Islam was not. This is not the case in Islam. We know that from the very revelations of Islam, 1400 years ago, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala defined the value and the position and the intellect of women as the same as men. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in Surah An-Nahl that Allah has made you mates of your own nature. And the Prophet ﷺ said that women are the twin halves of men. So the human nature of men and women are the same. The value is the same. And we know, again, 1400 years ago, the rights of citizenship of men and women were the same in education, gaining employment, in the ability to the ruler, and so on.
Dr. Nasreen, sorry, I'm going to have to cut you. I've got a text, so I want to take the text. It's addressed to you.
Sure.
So I'm going to read this out, and maybe you can, inshallah, give us your thoughts. So the text says, why is it that Dr. Nasreen says that Western nations can never secure women's rights? Surely it's a work in progress. West have moved much further than the Muslim world. Women can't even vote in Saudi Arabia. End of text.
It's a very good question, but I would answer it would say that the struggle for women's rights on the basis of gender equality has been happening for over a century now. As I mentioned, it's regressing. It's not, other than securing educational, economic rights, particular and political rights, the ability to be in parliament, and so on. Mm-hmm. In terms of security and in terms of respect, really, you see it regressing within many parts of the society as well. So really, it's not a model. Surely, regressing in achieving its aim should not be a model for women across the world to actually aspire to or embrace. Surely we need to look to a different model that has worked and does work in order to secure the rights of women. And I would say this is Islam and the Islamic system. Okay. It did for 1400 years, up to the Uthmani Khilafah. You had women who were engaged in society, who were able to manage their own wealth, who were able to account the ruler. There are examples of the Uthmani Khilafah even.
Yeah, but they could argue that women can actually account the ruler. I mean, we see that a lot of women have actually are MPs and they are in position. We had a woman prime minister in this country, so I can understand what they mean by look. It's something that's working. Whereas if you look at our Muslim world, nothing has moved on really. I think we've just cut off. Have we been cut off? Can we reconnect with Dr. Nasreen? Okay, inshallah, we will. This is what you get, unexpected, I guess. But we'll try and reconnect with Dr. Nasreen. And in the meantime, maybe just come back to the brothers in the studio. I think they were listening very attentively. And do you want to... so what do you think? What would you think of the last point that Dr. Nasreen was making? Where that this country was moving on, and if you look at what happened in what's going on in the Muslim world, they're not really. There is no Muslim rights, Muslim women's rights. Sorry, for the Khairul.
Yeah, I'll come to. Dr. Nasreen was making very, very good points. MashaAllah, alhamdulillah. I think she's back online.
Is she back online?
Assalamu alaikum, brother.
Sorry about that. We had some technical issues. So you're going back to the text. Let's go back to the text. Shall I read the text out again for our listeners? Let me do that. I think that will be more productive if I've got the text in front of me. Okay, it says, why is it that Dr. Nasreen says that Western nations can never secure women's rights? Surely it's a work in progress. West have moved much further than the Muslim world. Women can't even vote in Saudi Arabia. That was the text that we've received.
Yeah, like I mentioned, brother, it's a very good question. But number one, I would say don't use the standard of comparing the Western states to the regimes in the Muslim world who are not even Islamic from the basis as a reason for, hailing Western states as a model for how you secure women's rights. This idea that it's work in progress, like I mentioned, you have regression in terms, even from their own eyes, you have regression in gender equality within their society. But one of the most important points I would say, brother, is that there's a very narrow view of what it means in terms of securing women's rights. What good is there to secure the right for a woman to work or even be educated when she doesn't feel safe within the society and when she doesn't feel safe within her own home? And like I mentioned, 1 in 3 women across Europe in a survey that was done by the European Commission that they were victims of violence. How can you hail a society as being a success story with that in play? If you look across the world today, you find that around 800 million women are without basic food or sanitation and healthcare and so on. I mean, this cannot be a model of success And which is the system that the world lives by today, which is a dominant system. It's a capitalist, secular system. And so, really, we can see that it's the system within countries that needs to be looked at. You cannot solve problems from a very narrow gender perspective. If you have economies strangled by very, regressive capitalist policies that causes mass unemployment and mass poverty, how do you expect women to secure their economic rights? If you have dictatorships like you have in Syria and in Egypt and in other parts of the Muslim world, how do you expect women to secure their political rights? So really, it's nonsensical to this idea that just have conventions on gender equality and have equality acts in nations, and then you will secure women's rights. You have to actually change the systems in our lands in order to one which actually respects women and has a strategy for how you secure their rights, which is Islam.
Interesting point. And finally, did Muslim women fight for their rights, like the suffragette movement in the West? Could you share with us how the Prophet ﷺ was with his wives and contrasted with how Muslim women are treated today?
Really, this is an interesting point because in the history of Islam, we never had a women's movement. We never had a suffragette movement. Why was this? The reason for this is because the rights of women were naturally guaranteed by the system. Their economic rights, the right to account their ruler. From the time of the Khalifs, we know examples of women who would account Umar radiallahu anh, in open, in public, and he would welcome this. And he would say, for example, when a woman accounted him on a dowry, he would say that the woman is right and Umar is wrong. You had education, thousands of female scholars who were lecturers in the main universities and colleges of the time, and the mosques of the time. You had women who were able to manage their own wealth and become very rich within the society. So Islam did not need to have a women's movement because the system naturally secured their rights within society. And on top of that, Islam has a strategy, like I mentioned. For example, take respect. How do you establish respect for women in society? Islam has a way to maintain the dignity of women. Number one, it doesn't allow the exploitation of women or sexualization of women. Number two, it has an Islamic social system that doesn't cheapen the relationship between men and women. It regulates it in a very healthy manner. Number three, it has harsh punishments enforced on anyone who devalues the status of women, to the degree that even slander against the reputation of women is not tolerated.
Wow.
In addition to that, you have the Islamic view towards women, which is propagated. But the Prophet ﷺ said that none but a noble man treats women in an honorable manner, and none but an ignorant treats women disgracefully. So when you propagate these concepts within society, you will actually elevate the status of women, and then it's complemented by the laws and systems which are applied upon the society as well. So this is what I mean by a comprehensive strategy to even secure the concept of respect and dignity of women within society. Islam has this.
Fantastic.
How did the Prophet ﷺ treat his wives and his daughters? I mean, this is very clear from history. Like Prophet ﷺ never raised his hand to a woman, and this is established. He would, show affection to his wives. He would help them with their, the home duties. He would console them. He would play with them and he would talk to them. This is all narrated within the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. His daughters, we know Fatima radiallahu anha, he would, greet her by standing up, take her hand and give his seat to her. This is the manner by which he would treat his own daughter. And there are many hadiths of the Prophet ﷺ that talk about the respect by which daughters and wives should be treated. A beautiful one about daughters, the Prophet ﷺ said, do not be averse to daughters, for they are precious treasures that comfort your heart.
So do you think this is something that we need to present to this society? Our historical maybe account, what you've just given us, inshallah.
Inshallah, absolutely, brother. This is something which is a hidden reality within Western states. You have particular laws in Islam which are cherry-picked, like inheritance and like duties in marriage. And these other aspects of Islam are completely forgotten and not presented. So we, definitely as a Muslim community, we need to present these facts to the society around us.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for joining us and and giving your views on this subject. I hope you can join us next time when we have a topic which is as good as this, inshallah. So Jazakallah khair for joining us, and
inshallah,
thank you very much. Okay,
Jazakallah khair, brother, for the opportunity.
Barakallah.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Okay, brothers, back in the studio. Brother Khairul, so gender equality. I mean, Dr. Nasreen has given us quite interesting points, a couple of very good points, especially at the end. I really enjoyed listening to some of the points she's made about how Islam actually solves. But I want to go back to gender equality and your understand. Why is it such a big issue? And how did it come about in this society?
You know what? It's very, very important point. This, I mean, Dr. Nasreen Nawaz made quite a few really good points. But what I would make is, how did it come about? In that sense, that if you look at the reality of the Western world, during the medieval ages, the situation of women was really, really bad. They were witch hunted. Anyone who was educated, women, anyone who was outspoken, they were seen as witches. Yeah.
If they were educated, they were seen as witches.
Outspoken, anyone who challenged society's norms were seen as witches, and they would be witch hunted, and then they would be on the stake. This was in the medieval ages, and then you had enlightened period. They didn't get any rights. Women didn't get any rights. Everything was for men. Even ownership or participating in society. No, they were really, really treated as an object. So it's natural that from that you have a reaction to that, and the reaction is what? Reaction is people will fight for their rights. This is the same as in America. You have the liberation movement, or the civil rights movement.
Or the black
in
movement.
any society where there's oppression, it leads to people fighting against that oppression. And this is how, if you like, it started off. Now, the first thing that the women's rights movements came, suffragettes, and before that there was peaceful movements. They were also called suffragettes. It took them, they tried to get the vote. I mean, all they wanted was a vote. That's it.
Just the vote.
That's just a vote. Obviously, since then it has moved on to one after the other, and the next bit. But it took them 100 years to actually get the vote.
But the vote, just didn't mean the vote. I mean, obviously there were other things that came with the vote, isn't it?
Well, that's all they wanted at the time.
Wow.
They wanted to make a choice in terms of what society
they were actually fighting for the recognition as human beings, because they were not even seen as real souls, if you like.
That's a bit drastic.
I'm afraid that's how
statement.
It was. I'm afraid that's how it was. And this is the thing. This was the reality of the West. And in contrast, if you look at Islam, actually, gave a very clear definition and established all the rights of the women 1400 years ago. And
just before you come to that, Brother Samad, because there's a couple of points that didn't come across. Even that they wouldn't have got. But if you look at initially, it started about 1850s, the movement, and then the actual suffragettes, they became very militant in around 1910, just before the First World War. But even then, they were not getting anything. But what led to getting something was really World War One. End of World War One, women were needed in the workplace. They were needed to make the bombs, because a lot of the men were out on the battlefield and they were dying.
Okay.
And that's when they were being recognized in a certain way. And again, it's just a reaction to a problem, and therefore the solution that was proposed or came really did not give them much. Okay, they've got the vote, but they were still being oppressed in a different way. And then they obviously evolved to fighting for gender equality and so on and so forth, and one after the other. Where today it's become, what they're trying to do is gender neutral kind of stuff. Yeah.
Okay. What's that? Sorry.
Where you try to merge the men and women to be like the same, which doesn't work.
Basically, eradicate this whole concept of sexes, the different sexes in society, where everyone is just seen as one and the same.
How does that manifest?
Well, the latest example one might give is of unisex toilets, for example, which has been introduced in a school in UK.
Wow.
And so I mean, these are the sort of things. And if you look at the trends like in terms of fashion and things like this. You know, it's like it's all sort of like merging into one thing, where women's clothings are becoming more like men's clothings, and men's clothings are becoming more like women's clothing. So meaning to say that, you know, there shouldn't be a recognition of the obvious, which is really, you know, stupid in my opinion. You know, it just doesn't make sense, because naturally there is a difference between the man and the woman. You know, and to deny that, you know, or to be in denial is absolutely false, and really that has the potential to lead to further discrimination, if you like, further harm, and more so for the women. You see, because they're naturally the emotionally, physically, you know, in terms of they're.
So are you saying they shouldn't be seen as the same, obviously, because they?
I think the real problem is, you know, the West lacks something which is very important, which is a real definition for a man and a real definition for a woman. And this is where the woman is having to always measure up to the man in order to gain any sort of recognition. You know, and that in itself is oppressive.
Well, that would be the case, isn't it? In any, if you think about it, the whole secular liberalism concept is that God is removed from the scene. Yeah, in terms of living life, in terms of world, in terms of how we live. Okay, somebody can worship their own God in the church or in the masjid or at home during the tahajjud time, but in society, God does not play any part. So what happens is those people who have the power, they decide things in terms of what happens. Yeah, in this case, traditionally has been men. So as a result of that, women have been oppressed. Yeah, this is undeniable. Nobody can say women were not oppressed or are not oppressed. The problem is, what is the solution? And the solution, again, if is it just a reaction to the problem that men is oppressing us? When we do that, again, we're using our mind, just like they were using their mind and oppressing the female. The women use their mind and come up with these feminist solutions that we want to be like these men, but that actually doesn't work, simply because men ourselves, we don't understand ourselves. We need God to define us.
Okay, let me quickly take a text, and any of you brothers can inshallah take that on. As a Muslim woman, can I be a feminist as champion women's right living here in the UK? So she's saying, can she be a feminist woman and champion the woman's right? As a Muslim woman, can she be a feminist?
Yeah, well, actually, you know, this type of mindset, it comes from the society that we're living in. You know, the sort of ideas that are predominant and the sort of issues that people face, regardless of whether they're Muslim or non-Muslim. Yeah. And unfortunately, even there are, you know, it would be wrong to deny, but there may be certain issues that exist even within the Muslim community, which results in certain women having to resort to this type of mentality and this type of attitude, which is actually, you know, like if you look to the philosophy of it is actually rooted in the Western culture and nothing to do with Islam as such. Do you see?
Yeah. So, I mean, there is this inequality, isn't it, between...
what I would ask is exactly why somebody would want to be feminist. Yeah, and the reason why they want to be feminist...
Because they want to secure their rights.
That's right. So now the question is, how do we secure our rights? What solves... Because they want to solve a problem. They see, yes, even in the Muslim world, I mean, we shouldn't deny the fact that, you know, these are Muslim countries. In Bangladesh or Pakistan, you know, you have the honor killings, and in India... there's so much oppression, and maybe in this country, you know, there's a few more extra rights in that sense, in terms of education, in terms of going to work, but in terms of, has it liberated the women? That's the discussion. If a Muslim woman feels that these things have liberated the women, well, look at the statistics. What every people who are in education, one of the myths that is given is that if you're working and if you're earning lots of money, if women are doing that, then, you know, this
successful.
They'll become successful, and also oppression will decrease. You know, the status of women will increase, but the statistics show otherwise. So there's been a recent study that was done, and which shows that in the workplace, over 50% of women are harassed, sexually harassed. It's amazing. It's just, and then what it also says is that those who are higher up in the ladder, over 75% of them said they've been harassed.
Wow.
Yeah? So it hasn't actually delivered. Yeah? And it will not deliver simply because it is really coming out of the human mind. And this is where Islam is different. Islam, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala recognize the human being for what they are, and they are different. And those who are also tackling in terms of understanding, somebody recommended, I was having a few issues with my wife. Somebody recommended this book, Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus.
Okay.
Yeah. This is an interesting book. So people,
do you recommend this book? No?
Yeah, it'll give you quite good insight. Yeah, if you want to read the book, help you in your marriage, inshallah. But this is a natural case. I mean, what secular liberalism tries to deny is that men and women, somehow they're equal. But everyone knows they're not equal. They're different. Yeah, so women are more emotional. They want kids. They want to be lovey-dovey.
Biological differences, obvious differences.
I just want to quickly come back to the point that you've made. Sorry, Abdul Samad, you can come in. You've highlighted that look, there are issues in this country, but I think what the media does, it actually, you've touched on honor killing. If you look at in India, they've got acid thrown on their face. You got lack of education, girls getting married, forced marriages. These are quite rampant in Asia, in the Muslim community, in the Indian community.
In the absence of,
So how would you look at that? Because you gave statistics that in this country there's the woman being harassed and so on and so forth. But we can see that there are issues, isn't it?
There are issues. That's what I'm saying. There are issues, whether in India or Bangladesh or in the West. And really, the women's liberation movement and the movement in relation to feminists, this is what's allowed, if you like, in the current status, hasn't solved the problem. Okay. Hasn't solved the problem in India and hasn't solved the problem in the West. And it can't solve the problem simply because it doesn't understand the human, the differences in terms of men and women. So to actually think that they're all both equal, they're not. Yeah, they're different, but they're equal in the sense of the law. Yeah, this is how Islam recognizes them.
I've got a text. I'm going to take that. I think is relevant to what we're discussing here. People always talk about Muslim woman and equality. What about other religions and their women, which may be borderline oppression? This is from Bilal from South End.
Jazakallah for the question. I mean, one of the things that you talked about India, we've got a lot of baggage from India. And remember, they had things like there was so much oppression of women in India because they used to see men as their God, the living God on earth. They're their husbands. So even when they had something called sati, where if the husband died, the women used to jump into the fire.
Wow.
From that kind of tradition, and the British really didn't do much to change any of this. Mm-hmm. The British, they were oppressing women in this country, so they weren't going to another country to oppress anyone, to try and liberate them. So they left these kind of value systems in place. A lot of Islam, actually, what you find, again, in Bangladesh, somebody who gets married and they come to the husband's house and they become like a worker, a servant. These kind of things is not from Islam. It's not Islam that's doing this. This is cultural stuff the baggage that we carry from Hinduism, from previous
from tribal systems, from other traditions.
I mean, this
happens as a result of the absence of Islam as a standard by which we govern our lives in society. You see, so in the absence, you find other ideas, other traditions, other cultures creep in, and they, and what we have in even in the Muslim countries, you have dictatorial regimes, and these are scenarios. These are the scenarios where other types of cultures flourish.
So do you think some of this oppression, so the brother Bilal, he's saying like maybe there's borderline oppression. Do you think it comes from culture rather than Islam, what you're saying. So India,
it's interesting.
Predominantly Hindu
but there is a culture in media to try and malign it or align it with Islam. For example, FGM, when FGM's talked about, it's like it's the Muslims or honor killing or any of these forced marriages. It's always, Islam and Muslims, and it's never another religion. I think this is what the point the brother's making. Doesn't other religions oppress? The only thing, the difference is Islam has given a solution to these problems these people are facing, which is an alternative to secular capitalist way of thinking that actually truly liberates the women. And that's what the liberals are afraid of. For people to hear this alternative way to solve these problems that they haven't managed to solve over 100 years, over more than 100 years.
Well, saying that, look, every year we have the International Women's Day. Does this not show that women have been liberated, and it's a cause for celebration because it's a step?
No, actually it isn't. It's all it is just a way of projecting the Western culture and Western perspective, and really, imposing this Western experience upon the entire world. Now, like the sister said earlier, there was no such thing as a women's movement in the history of Islam, and we have 1400 years of Islamic rule under which women flourished. I mean, they talk about education. Oh, look, Islam prevents women from education, and as an interesting fact, if you like, your listeners will find interesting.
Please share.
The first ever university was actually under Islamic rule, and it was founded by actually a woman, a Muslim woman. That's right, and her name it's actually situated in Morocco, Fez, and it's called the Qayrawan. And this lady was actually a very educated, and she was a daughter of a very wealthy merchant, and she founded the first ever university, which, in them days, I mean, the West had no such concept, if you like.
Was it just for women, or there was?
No, this university still exists to this day, and I don't believe it's just for women. But it's yes, it definitely does cater for women as well. But the important point is women were in these sort of positions where they were able to sort of like establish institutions for education. So all these things need to be sort of like learnt and understood. And we shouldn't fall for this Western experience. Unfortunately, this is what it is. It's just a Western experience that has been thrust upon the entire globe, and these international conventions and whatnot is just getting people to sort of like come on board with this thing, and it's as if the entire humanity was in the dark ages as the West was. Do you see?
The question is, you can have these conventions, International Women's Day organized by the United Nations and so on. The problem is, they can only solve the problem if they understood the question, if they understood the problem in its sense. So what is the result? You can have, like I said, for more than 100 years, this kind of, these kind of moves have been happening. But the result is what? The result is the number of women being oppressed, harassed, the rights of women hasn't really improved. In terms of it, degraded.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I'll tell you where the problem is. Yeah, the problem starts with the.
You can jump in.
Yeah, sorry. I'll tell you.
That's fine. I'll carry on afterward.
The problem is, they started on the wrong foot, right? Okay. Because what they've done, they've actually set the women against the men and the men against the women. So it's become a competition. It's become a struggle from day one. And the nature of a struggle will always remain a struggle. It doesn't seek to create harmony. It doesn't seek to, the two sexes is just not in harmony. It's always in competition. Whereas with Islam, you'll find that the rights and the roles and the responsibilities are very clearly stated, by which it establishes harmony. So one is not set against the other, and this is the nature of everything, if you like, in the West.
Okay, I'll let Brother Khairul come in. I think he wanted to finish his point.
So my point was basically secular liberalism says men human beings rule. By nature of human beings ruling, what happens is there is always conflict. So those people who are ruling, they're doing something, and somebody else is being oppressed because they're not holistic really ruling. They don't have understanding the way Islam has given us from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala system. So what happens is women will react and they will want to change certain laws, and something else happens and somebody else reacts, and then somebody else reacts, and this is the way they go through life basically without solving any of the problems, and creating every time new law comes in, a new problem is created, and then a new problem created, and new problem created, and they go into this spiral. This is where the question is man able to rule according to his whims and desires, or do we need something else external? And this is what Islam says, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has revealed us a system where He recognizes the man, He recognizes the women, a system where each of them are in harmony and they fulfill their purpose in life.
Okay, I've got interesting text here, and it says, I'm a non-Muslim man, but kind of I'm a non-Muslim man, but what kind of equality do they want in this country? When there's an equal amount of women on my builder's work site, then I'll put my hands up.
There you are. That says it all. The whole nature, the whole idea of equality is very, very flawed. Because in exactly what this non-Muslim person has said, women, they are in terms by nature that their body is different, biologically they're different, so they do different things. They're emotionally different. They have different needs, and the men have different needs. When you talk about gender equality, you haven't recognized any of this, and you can't recognize any of this. That's the problem. That's why no matter how many international conventions you have, unless you understand the problem, unless you understand the nature of human beings, it's not possible to solve it.
Can I quickly move on? Because I know we've got about 10 minutes, and I've planned a lot to discuss here, but I think we're running out of time. But I want to quickly go through this. Amina Wudud came and led men and women in Salah. This was seen as an achievement for the feminists. How do you view this?
Wow. Like I say, I mean, we're living in a time when the Western sort of like ideas, they affect everybody, and this is what's happening. I mean, like there's this drive for equality now. It has to sort of like even come into Islam as well, where just the fact that a woman has led the prayer has somehow achieved something, and this is by the Western standards. Do you see? And this is what the problem is, because of the absence of the Islamic standard. We find that we're getting caught up in this sort of like Western struggle ourselves. So it's a shame, really. I find that we're not seeing things from Islam and really understanding our rights, roles, and responsibilities from Islam.
And when you don't do that, you will get into this kind of mess, where you feel that, look, this is equality. Because we see that in Christianity as well, isn't it?
What is driving this again is gender equality. They're thinking in gender equality. In my household, my wife doesn't work, but she's a graduate.
Okay.
And it's very interesting when we discuss with people, and she hasn't worked for the last 15 years, and the comments you go, oh, it's a waste. You did a degree and you waste. Why don't you go out to work? Why don't you do something? They'd rather prefer that we leave the kids with a carer and work, so that you're equal to men. This is how. Whereas she's a mother, she wants to provide the motherhood. This is the nature of women in terms of, and also the children. They need the mother to nurture a society which is which is a progressive society. Yeah?
So do you think they are pushed,
This is-
women are pushed to go to work rather than being mothers at home looking after the kids?
Exactly, that's the only way. That seems to be the only way.
This is what it looks like. So what you find, this whole push about equality is also, men lead the salah prayer, so women need to lead the salah prayer. So men do so and so we need to do so and so. But these are all flawed argument. Like our non-Muslim, guest has spoken. He said, look, women, we should see them in the builders with the builders. You can't do that. Yeah. By nature, they're different.
Yeah, but the point is, this also says something else, which is that the role that a woman would play at home in raising the children, educating the children, maintaining the house is not worth anything. It's of lesser value. Yep. As according to a capitalist society, because where back in the days they were chained to the kitchen sink, now they're chained to the economic market, if you like. Do you see? And so therefore, they have no value if they're a housewife raising children, looking after the children, and things like this. And this doesn't create harmony. This is where the real problem is. Yeah. This doesn't create harmony, because what we're saying is that, in the Quran it says, al-mu'minuna wal-mu'minat ba'duhum awliya'u ba'd. The man and the woman, they are, helpers of each other. Do you see? And they work together to establish harmony and establish order in a way that really everybody benefits and everything is in peace. And this is why when you value like a profession, a job, over and above raising children, looking after children, maintaining the house and things like this, that is discrimination in itself, because there's nothing to say that raising children is somehow of lesser worth. Unless very hard work. Unless you're in a capitalist society where you only value that thing that brings in the capital.
Raising children is 24 hours work.
It's a very, and this is the thing, in Islam we value this very highly, and this is why our women, Muslim women, are not seen as worthless or of lesser to men in any way. In fact,
even though they may be educated, yeah.
Exactly, yeah.
And do you deny that? Obviously, we can see in the Muslim world that the education is very poor.
Yeah, I mean, if you actually look to what's happening to the women in the West today is actually very, very oppressive, because what they're having to do is not only because just because they have a career and whatnot, it doesn't mean that they are given time off from maintaining the house and raising the children and cooking and all the rest of it, because the majority of the women of the West still have to do all of that as well. So
they get help from their husband.
Well, actually, they don't. You'll find that women are maintaining a career and they're running, they're doing the school runs, and they're doing the cooking, and they're doing the cleaning, and all the rest of it. And they've just literally become the superwoman, and that is oppression. You see, whereas in Islam, Islam actually distributes the roles and responsibilities between the man and the woman. And makes it obligatory upon the man to provide, to be the breadwinner, do you see? And really relieves the women from that duty entirely. Now, if the woman did work, that becomes just her money, and she has right over that money to spend it how she feels that she wants. She has no obligation to spend it on the husband or the family or anybody, whereas the man is. And so how can you say that the woman is being oppressed?
Interesting point. What about the earning of the man?
Exactly. The earning of the man he has an obligation to actually provide, even if the wife is rich.
I'm going to try and understand this. Does she have right over
she has absolute
share? Does she have a share over his earning?
Yes, absolutely. She does. She has right that the man has to provide for her food, clothing, shelter, and all the rest of it.
These rights in the Western world, where women fought over a century to get not even half of these rights, and still the fight goes on. Islam gave them these rights 1400 years ago. Islam recognized the women. Within the women class, there were judges, there were scholars, there were they were educators and so on. This is the case in terms of women. In terms of earning, economy, they even those who fought Islam. Yeah, for example, there's one person, Hind, famous person. She was one of the instrumental person who killed, who got Hamza, who was uncle, very, very close to Rasulullah sallallahu killed, and even, chewed his liver. This person later on became Muslim and went into business and flourished, became very, very well established businesswoman.
Okay.
Yeah? So this is we're talking about 1400 years ago, and this is because this is a system that is revealed to us from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
Okay, so you're talking about Islamic society. How would a true Islamic society create a balance between men and women, where their rights are secured and have equal footing?
Well, like we've covered some of this already. I think.
What was it true? How would you do that?
Like we said, in terms of the rights and responsibilities, these are. With regards to like politics, education, business, and all the rest of it, the men and the women are equal. But in other areas, Islam has distributed the rights and the roles and the responsibilities, separately from man and woman. And now this doesn't go, this doesn't automatically equate to discrimination of any sort. You see, which is something that is perceived in the West because they're exclusively looking at it from the Western experience, and which is a bad experience, really, and therefore, their judgment of these things is very superficial.
Okay,
all right, and so yes, there are certain differences, and these differences are these differences doesn't make the women any lesser than man.
Okay, Brother Khairul, you gave very nice examples of the time of Rasulullah sallallahu and narrated a story. But how would we replicate this now? If you look at, we're in a dilemma.
I think that's another problem on its own. We talked about the problems that Muslim women are facing, even in India or Bangladesh or Pakistan, or even Saudi Arabia, and if you look, the reason why all of these places are still a problem is because they follow the Western standard, like Brother Samad is constantly mentioning. If you follow the Western standard, the problem is that creates problem in its own. So the way to solve the problem is to go back to Islamic standard and establish the Khilafah. And the Khilafah, which is the Islamic political system, has got many rights for women in terms of exactly how.
So the caliphate is a political system, yeah.
That's the system by which you can recognize the role of the women and the man in his proper places and establish. If you look at some of the sayings of Rasulullah sallallahu, he says amongst his signs is this, that he created mate. Actually, this is in the Quran. That he created mates for you from yourselves, that you may find rest and peace of mind in them, and he ordained between you love and mercy. Certainly herein indeed are signs for people who reflect. And the Prophet ﷺ saying seek knowledge is mandatory for every believer, and that includes men and women. And from the way the women were treated at the time of Rasulullah sallallahu, because these are, if you like, the basis of law. So any Khilafah state would treat women that way. So examples are, accounting the leader. So at the time of Umar radiallahu anh, you had a woman come up.
Quite good examples of that.
Examples of those.
Yeah.
I think
you'll have to finish it off. We've got a couple of minutes left.
I think the problem isn't about roles and responsibilities, because and this is a wrong area where the West is targeting. I think it should be about valuing the value of woman and respect. And once that is there, then really, it's no problem having different. Are all men in the society equal to each other? And the answer is not. But how come there isn't a struggle there? Do you see? So, like I say, it's not about different people will have different roles. Even as men, we have different roles. So what? You know,
you're not fighting for
we're not fighting for that. You know, so why is it that the men have to be set up against the women and the women have to be set up against the men?
Interesting point.
So one last point.
Okay, you make the last point.
So what we say is that it should be based on mutual respect, and Islam has established that in its text 1400 years ago. And this mutual respect is the thing that we need to look to move forward. And I mean, like even in the absence of the Khilafah, you will find those Muslims that are practicing, how do they refer to their women, or how do they refer to this next woman that is on the street? They would refer to them as a sister, or as a mother, or they will see them in that light, in that respect. And the sister would, even in your show, as you spoke to Sister Nasreen Nawaz, you said sister. That shows respect. That's how we treat women, and this is how our women treat our men as well. So it has to be based on mutual respect and not about roles. On
this note, I think you've made a very important point here. I think that was a very good finish off to the show. It's a very important discussion, and I hope you guys can continue and discuss this topic. Unfortunately, we can't cover everything within an hour, so maybe we can do another show on women's rights. Again, just like to end by thanking our guests for coming in and discussing women and equality, and a special thanks to our sister Dr. Nasreen Nawaz for her contribution. We have gained and benefited much from these important discussions. Jazakallah khair to everyone. Jazakallah khair, brothers. And a special thanks to all our listeners. I hope you can join us next week at Straight Talk. You can follow us on Twitter at Middle Path Radio and continue with this discussion, inshallah. Again, thank you for listening to Middle Path Radio. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Middle Path Radio, your number one online Islamic talk station.